All right, good evening. Welcome to tonight's InfoCast, which is hosted by the Winchester Town Meeting Members Association. I'm Lance Frensback, our chair of the TMMA, and joining me is Carol Savage, our vice chair, and she is our expert Zoom wrangler, without whom we wouldn't be broadcasting tonight. The topic of tonight's session, the second in the series, is the State of the Town Initiative. Our guest speakers are Select Board Member Paras Bhayani, who chairs the State of the Town Committee, and Michelle Pryor, who chairs the Winchester Select Board. The State of the Town Committee has been reviewing the town's operating budget and capital needs, our asset management practices, and our tax and fiscal policies. And the committee has just recently issued its final report. So Paras and Michelle will be describing the committee's key findings and the Select Board's next steps. I know that most of you are familiar with the TMMA, but let me quickly remind you that the TMMA is an association of town meeting members. It's not an arm of town government, nor an arm of town meeting. And as such, the TMMA does not vote on or take position on town issues or articles before town meeting. The TMMA's goals are to improve communications between town meeting and town hall and among town meeting members. In addition to these infocasts, we publish the bulletin, which carries updates from the town boards and committees. Thank you, Jill. And we maintain the forum, which is an online discussion board where town meeting members can post questions, comments, and information about issues and articles before town meetings. So if you have questions you don't get answered tonight, feel free to post them on the TMMA's board, and we'll try to get answers to you. I notice we will be recording this InfoCast and posting the recording to the forum and the TMMA's YouTube channel. We will also provide the recording to WinCam for rebroadcast. So if you can't stay for the whole session, you can watch the late night reruns. A copy of tonight's presentation slides, I believe, can be downloaded using the link that we're going to put in the Zoom chat window that shows up. And now, if you have questions during the presentation, which we expect will run 20-30 minutes or so, please type them into the chat window so we don't forget them. We will read them out during the Q&A session after the presentation, and then certainly open the floor for questions. So for tonight's presentation, Paras, Michelle.
Thanks, Lance, and thanks everybody in the room. We have enough seats, and thanks everybody online. So Carol, if you can pull it up for us, that would be great. You can go to the next slide. So this is our agenda for this evening. Paras and I are going to go back and forth on background, budget. And Paras is going to talk about municipal and capital and tax override. I'll wrap up with fiscal stewardship. We've probably gone more than 30 minutes, but we'll see how it goes. So I think it's the fourth time we've done this presentation, so hopefully we can do it quicker. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Carol, that'd be great. So one thing we wanted to ground ourselves. I also want to note that the State of the Town group, when we talk to the next page, is several of the group is on our briefing tonight, and thanks for showing up. There's a lot of credit that goes into the work that we did. We wanted to ground ourselves with what is Winchester and who are we and what have we done? A town known for its academic excellence and services and education, focused on preserving our natural health, our natural environment, our built-out environment and climate. We want to be inclusive to residents, longtime residents and new arrivals, and people at all stages of life. We're committed to running an efficient government and being excellent stewards of our taxpayer resources. There's a lot that we should be proud of. I've lived here for 20 years, and those 20 years we've reconstructed or built new 6 of the town's 7 schools. We have a thriving senior center. We have a thriving WIN rec, serving people of all ages and various decades. We're about to complete our multi-year flood mitigation project. The last project is the Morocco Culvert. We expect that to start shortly. And so with that has been going from Mystic Lake all the way up to Horn Pond and trying to save some of our residents and these buildings in downtown from flooding. We have a AAA bond rating, one of only 13 or 14 communities in the state that do so. So there's a lot that we've done. There's a lot that we've invested in our infrastructure, in our environment, and shoring up our finances. But we convened the State of the Town. Next slide, please, Carol. Right after Springtown meeting to really try to get a handle on where are we now and where do we think we'll be fiscally in 3 to 4 years, 3 to 5 years. Going into this current fiscal year, we have a structural deficit of $4 million. It's more like 5.5 now that we're doing the budget. State of the Town wanted to look at putting the town on solid financial ground and having a financial plan that could last for 3 to 4 years. The last operating override we asked taxpayers to support was in 2019. So that's 7 years ago. It probably supported us through about 4 or 5 fiscal years, but the last 2 years we balanced our budget with our savings and free cash. So we convened the state of the town in May, June, and looked at these 6 specific areas of needs. So what do we need for the town and for schools and the town operating needs? What about our capital assets? Where can we find revenue that isn't just tied to the property tax levy? How can we look at efficiencies around the way we deliver services? Then we had some focus on tax fairness. There are various exemptions, volunteer programs. Where can people get some relief on their tax bill? And what are we committed to as a select board to steward those finances pretty carefully and strategically over the next several years? So you can go to the next slide. The state of the town, Paras was the chair, I was the vice chair. We had all 5 select board members participate either in person or online. 3 school committee members were consistently present. Finance committee had 4 core members. Capital planning sent 2 members, planning board 1, and 7 members of the public, of which many are on the call tonight. I know Kathy Bodie's on, Chrisette is on, Steve Engel is on. I'm probably missing a few others. Candy Van Aken is on. So our residents, we asked for 5 people to volunteer, 7 showed up, so we gave them all a role in the committee. And the way we organize the work for town and school operating needs, Tim Matthews and Stephanie Menarche from the school committee, Anthea Brady, Paras, and myself did it on the municipal side. On capital, we had our capital planning committee chair and member, and then Bill McGonigal, our select board rep. I took the lead on property tax revenue, non-property tax revenue and structural efficiencies, and Paras did tax fairness and fiscal stewardship. And to be honest, he did all the things, but that's the ones that he signed up for. And if we go to the next slide, for anyone who hasn't read the report, we have a link here in the QR code. It's available on our winchester.us website. The report runs 25 pages, but I want to just note under the QR code, the 14 backup reports that are also in the state of the town box. We really wanted to ground ourselves in the facts report from 2000 to the capital plan for the last 5 years. With that QR code, there is a lot of background material and detail. There are how many models of the budget now? A dozen, 14?
14 models, but I think we've revised it each one 5 times, so 80 probably.
I think you need to find the tab.
So if you really wanted to do a deeper dive into how did we get here, what did we analyze, and what helps to inform that story, report is there, but also there are links in this box that we maintained as sort of our file server. You can drill down at your leisure, but that is available for you to read. And that's really what tonight's presentation is about, with some additional commitments that we've made as a select board. Now, if you can go down one more slide, now we're going to dive into some of the work and where we landed on override and potentially with select board. We are at least going into town meeting on Monday. I'll turn over to Paras.
So I'll just say a quick word on the previous slide. What as Michelle said, what we didn't do here, and candidly would have been a lot less work, is if you want to go back one more slide, Carol, is to what we could have done and would have been a lot less work is to simply size the scale of our deficit. You know, what is our revenue, what's our expense, what do schools think they need, what does municipal think they need, and come up with a number. That probably would have taken us until about July. What we're going to spend the bulk of the time today on is the other work streams. So non-property tax revenue, structural cost and efficiencies, tax fairness, and fiscal stewardship. But what we wanted to sort of lead with, because we didn't want to do this at minute 40 of the presentation, is to give you a sense of where we landed, and then we'll backtrack to explain how we got here in the first place. So a core piece of the work has been the fact that we know that we'll need a general override to fund both operations and capital. And so we've done, a lot of work that we're going to talk about tonight. We've built a variety of models. We'll talk about what the assumptions in those models are, both for level services and for the strategic additions that we think the town needs. And we'll do the same on capital. And what we've arrived at, as you can see on this page, the majority of the select board has indicated support for a $12.5 to $15 million overrun. And so that would be split on the lower end, and this is what we're seeking feedback on now, as well as at town meeting and the public hearing on Monday. On the lower end of the range, we would be at 10 million of operating and 2.5 million of capital. That would be an infusion of capital into the capital stabilization and building stabilization funds. So that's a recurring number. On the upper end, and then to the lower bound is 12.5. On the upper end of the range, the group has indicated support for up to 13 of operating and up to 3.5 of capital. Now, I'm sure all of you will rapidly realize that 13 plus 3.5 does not equal 15. it equals a number greater than 15. And so the bottom row is where the select board indicated support, 12.5 to 15, which is to say you couldn't take, the select board did not support, or not, 3 members of it did not support 13 plus 3.5. For example, if we came in at 3.5 of capital, we would be at a lower number of operating, we'd be at 11.5 of operating. So the bottom line is that 12.5 to 15, and then ranges of 10 to 13 and 2.5, 3.5 for operating, which is capital. So let me hand it back to Michelle, and then you're going to take us through the assumptions that we have in our model as it exists today, some of the things that the select board combined with the school committee have done to bring that a little bit more into alignment, and then from there, what it implies for our budget.
And just be the last thing, you can go ahead 2 more, Carol, but for people that are watching tonight or are not town meeting members, but want to hear more, I'll just note, there's a town meeting on Monday night, February 9th, starting at 7 o'clock at McCall Middle School, followed by a public hearing on the override, which will be select board hosted. So it will be some of the same information, but it's at McCall, and we will have the town moderator moderate the special town meeting. Then we will adjourn and have a public hearing where anyone can ask a question. So we want to make sure that as many people feel welcome and are invited to go.
The questions are non-town meeting members invited to attend the 7 o'clock?
Yes,
Absolutely.
Okay.
town meeting's open.
Yes. So with that little advertisement for Monday night and the clarifications at McCall, this is where we are looking at our budget model. So why an override? As we talked about the structural deficit going into next fiscal year, which begins in July, we are limited by Prop 2.5 to grow we grow our revenue, not just property tax, at around 3% a year. We have property tax revenue, which makes up a significant part of the money that we collect in the course of a year. We have building permits and new growth. We have local receipts like excise tax and restaurant tax. We get some modest federal aid. We get some modest state aid. But the bulk of our revenue comes from our residents.
What's the percentage?
What's that?
What's the percentage?
94% of our revenue comes from
Of our property tax.
property tax levy. So in looking at where we can grow on our own backs and what we can expect from the state, the governor's budget came out last week. We had about $300,000 more. We really can't grow year over year enough money to generate or close a $4 million deficit. The deficit's been growing over the last couple of years, hence why now is the right time for an override. We don't know the status of federal aid. That's basically education funding. We're counting it and counting on it to come in, but any of those numbers can change at any given time. Our municipal departments, so that's police, fire, public works, health insurance, workers' comp, that grows at about 3% per year. Public schools have been growing faster over the last several years, around 5.5%. There's annual cost of living adjustments that all of our union members get, and then steps and columns that educators can earn additional salary by achieving additional levels of education and training. And our health insurance the last 2 years has been coming in about 15% growth. I think in people's personal lives, ACA subsidies might be causing higher premiums on individual household levels, but at the town level, we had 2 years of 14% plus increases. And we're trying to pay off our pension for all of our retired municipal employees. We will be fully funded by FY28, but we're still funding that at about 5% growth year over year. So we want to continue to meet that expense. But that's where our general sort of challenges are. We can grow revenue at 3%, and we have costs that are some are at 3, some are at 5.5, some are at 15. So we need to find a way to close the gap. If you can go to the next one, Carol. So going into this override, where else can we find some revenues beyond the property tax? We have, over the last several years, had interest income come in $800,000 to $1 million. Some of that was coming from having borrowed for the new Lynch School. We drew down property tax revenue. We're able to put in savings accounts that generated some cash flow. We'll be looking to make some different investments in our various stabilization funds. We can only invest in certain types of, index funds and accounts. We can't be very aggressive with town resources, but if there's ways to have some additional cash come in and realize better returns, we intend to do that. The town manager started to look at all of our fees and fines, some of which we haven't updated in 15 to 20 years. And we did a scan across 6 or 8 other towns and said if they charge $35, should we be, and we charge $25, should we charge $35? We're not looking to take fees and fines from $50 to $250, but where someone else is at 75, we think we can. So the town manager is looking at that. And we're looking at potentially adding some additional solar arrays on town property. Those can they can do two things. They can reduce our energy expense. They also, if we don't own them, we release them and we can get some revenue on solar. So we're looking at, in our model, about $1.2 million of incremental revenue that we hope to realize starting in FY 27 and persisting, not one-time revenues, but ongoing recurring revenue. And then on the expense side, public schools have agreed to try to limit their year-over-year growth, not at 5.5%, but at 4.25% over the span of the next 4 years. That they just finalized a contract with one of their larger units, and that will need to be considered within that 4.25% growth. And health insurance, we've done lots of plan changes. We've tried to change our plans with the benchmark plans with Maya. We made an adjustment in the spring, but I'm not sure how much we can squeeze out of a 14% increase, but where we can, we'll work with unions and we'll work with our health insurance consultants to see if we can bend that curve. And our long OPEB is our health insurance for retirees, looking to see if there are plan changes, not just for active employees, but retired employees as well. So some ideas have come out of it. Some might generate $1.2 million or $1.5 million. That still doesn't close a $4 million deficit. So now that's what we've done and what we plan to do. And now I'm going to have Paras go through what some of that sort of revenue and revenue shortfalls does for our reserves.
Yeah. So as Michelle said, we have factored in 1.2 million of incremental revenue that we have a clear line of sight to some of, but not all of. And so our view is that we needed to really answer two questions for how we size the override. You see this on the next page, on page 11. Yeah, read that. That's good, Carol. So first question is, how long should this override last? The last one designed last 3 or 4 years. So we didn't take that as gospel, but that was a somewhat useful guideline. Other towns that we've looked at, Arlington, for example, generally plans for about 4 years as well, people who do it more programmatically. And the other question we had to ask ourselves is, how do we judge when it's time to go out sort of for the next fiscal program? Because we want this program to last as long as possible. And the answer to that second question really is our operating reserves. So not what is the annual flow, but what is the amount that we actually have left in operating reserves? Because that's the closest thing to a bottom line that a municipal government like us would have. And so the select board has had for 15 years an operating reserve policy of 6 to 10%. That was, very low and well below what the market would tell us that we needed. We did a bunch of analysis with our advisor, with Moody's, with S&P, taking a look at state guidance from the Department of Revenue, and we revised that policy this fall in September up to 10 to 14% on the back of a successful override and stepping into that over a 2 fiscal year period. So those are the sort of two questions that we used to put parameters around this. We said on one piece, we think they should last 3 to 4 years. And then on the other side of that we need to remain at least above 10% from an operating reserve perspective. And so what you see below is the two ends of the range of what an operating override would be, the 10 to 13. So this excludes capital. And FY29 is year 3, FY30 is year 4. So when we add in the strategic additions that we're going to talk about in the next conversation, in the next few slides, most of which are for WPS in terms of the curriculum overhauls and some of the construction of a tier 2 program that's a sub-special education program, as well as some municipal adds. That's what you see on the strategic additions, box, the 11%, 4.6%. And then on level services, that would be just maintaining things as they are with the assumptions that are on the previous page. So WPS grows at 4.25, municipal departments grow at 3, and health insurance grows at the mid-teens. So that's just that, no additional enhancements beyond sort of the government sort of as we know it today. And what you see in this table, and this is how we've really tried to triangulate it, is that at a $10 million override, we can get to 3 years, right? At 11%, we're safe from an operating reserve policy. It's harder to get to full. On a $13 million override, it is easy to get to 3 for strategic additions. You're at 14.2, and you're pretty close to even getting to 4 years at the 9.5%. And so what we've committed ourselves to doing is finding that first 1.2 million of revenue. And our view is, and this is why we're committing to 3 to 4 years, not a hard 4 years, is that we think we can get to 3 years and then some. We'll call it 3 years and 3 months, 3 years and 6 months. And then the select board and the school committee have to commit ourselves not just to find that 1.2 million of revenue or incremental cost savings, but some number greater than that. And we floated different ideas to find not just 1.2 million, but even an additional 500,000 beyond that. And so we haven't factored that in, but we have taken a view that we can bake in 1.2 million on top of our current assumptions for strategic additions. We can get to 3 to 4 years. And then from there, the select board over a multi-year period has to commit itself to finding additional revenue or additional growth, as well as additional cost savings to get us that last 6 months or 9 months to get us to that 4 year period. So this is how we've done it.
So these percentages are the reserve balance.
Correct.
Mhm.
So let's talk about what the strategic additions are. If you want to go to page 13, Carol, we'll talk about the strategic additions. Michelle talked about what level services assumptions are. We'll talk about the capital program and then tax impact. What does this actually cost the town, as well as tax fairness? I'll hand it back to Michelle, and then we'll open it up for questions. So from a strategic additions perspective, as we said, municipal budgets all grow at 3%. We haven't grown any of them faster than that. So the principal budgets on the municipal side are DPW, fire, and police. Those three account for the bulk of our spending. And what we did is we had a process where our town manager, our former town manager, went out, talked to a bunch of departments. They bubbled up a bunch of ideas. We divided that into sort of two halves. One is what we thought were, needs, what we thought were kind of nice to haves. Then we took the needs and we walked through them as a select board over 2 sessions. We then had our interim town manager at the time go out, talk to departments, get us more information. And ultimately the select board prioritized of that sort of needs section of what came back from our departments, as well as talking to members of the community, about 800,000, about half of the 1.6 million of ads that our departments thought were important for them. And you can see some of the highlights here on this page. So from the COA, creating a lease payment to the Jenk Center, which they've never had, that could help finance a renovation. From a recreation standpoint, the recreation department's about a $5 million a year organization, of which only about 180,000 is supported by taxpayers. The remaining, so 90+% of it, 95% of it, is funded by fees. And so working with our director of rec, Michelle, myself, and Stephanie, who's here on the phone, talked to him about if we, doubled the size of that subsidy, so we made it, call it $350,000. What could he do with that? Could he create a director of adult education, incubate a bunch of additional programs for adult education that would likely take place in our school buildings, and then as those scale, move those onto the fee-paying part of the recreation department. So broadening the size of his sort of incubation fund. We've taken a look at conservation priorities. We have investments that we need for preserving our waterways. In town, we have a number of ponds: the Wedge, Winter, Mill, and Judkins Pond, as well as creating a professional tree program, something we haven't had in town. A lot of our peers have, to arrest the decline for canopy, important for not just climate resilience, but sort of the charm and property values of town. Community health, smaller one, but we have obviously a staff member that probably all of you know, who's funded by a grant from the Cummins Foundation. If that were to expire in 2028, making sure we have the ability to backstop that as a relatively modest amount. We have to strengthen the cybersecurity and resilience for our town government. It's money we don't ever want to have to use, but if we had a ransomware attack or a virus attack that could bring down our town operations fully, having what's called a DFIR firm that could provide some backstop to that. And then some one-time expenses that the planning board has highlighted around modernizing our zoning bylaw, which we think could actually help with growth, as well as the development of the Holton Cross corridor, and then finally updating our town master plan, which was last done 5 years ago, which has to be done legally under state law, and also is what, if we don't do it, we are ineligible for a whole host of state grants that greatly exceed the amount of money it takes, frankly, to do the updated master plan. So that's the municipal side. Carol, if you want to go to the next page on the schools. So as Michelle said, the school committee historically their budget grew at about mid-5s, so sort of 5.5%, 5.7%, and that was based on COLAs. That was based on steps, meaning additional seniority, and column shifts, so additional training and education. Working with us, the school committee and the select board gave the school committee guidance on this. The school committee accepted that, worked very hard with their union, as well as just making internal shifting in terms of making sure class sizes were at the policy, that we didn't have class sizes in sections that were too small. So they brought that down to 4.25%. Sounds like a modest difference, 1.5 or 1.25%. But on a $72 million budget, that's about $1 million. So it's a big shift in their trend spending. And then what they've articulated to us is a program to add about $4.5 million of additional spend over the next 4 years. That wouldn't all hit in year one, but that would be phased in over a 4-year period of time. And that equates to roughly $1,000 per pupil. And so this is the place that we're seeing a higher level of investment. It's the larger government relative to the municipal side. And you can see what the investments are on this page. And we'll be sharing this in a little more detail ahead of town meeting. But the new elementary literacy overhaul is the largest piece of that. There's a one-time component. There's also a recurring component, a similar overhaul 2 years later in math, expanded course offerings in the middle and high school, because the first two are really more elementary focused. The math is all the way up through high school. And then the creation of a tier 2 program. So a lot of districts, there are our peers, students who are in general education and need some additional support, receive what are called tier 2 services. We have special education, which is tier 3. We really don't have a tier 2 program today. And so we have a very high level of IEP identification. And then we're also just not serving students who might need remediation in certain areas, that are more targeted, math or literacy or something else. And so what the tier 2 program allows us to do is to meet those student needs, but also over a long period of time to bring down the heavy level of our IEP load by having students who can be served in tier 2 not end up identified in tier 3.
So these are all ratchets, right? In other words, they go up, it's not one time, it goes up.
Some are.
Some of them are one time,
Yeah.
and we're asking the school committee to give us that breakdown. Even some might be curriculum purchasing, and then a year or two of professional development. We've asked them to carve that out for us, which are one-time investments, which need to be recurring, sort of FTE ads or licensing cost if it's software that we're purchasing. So we're waiting for those details back, but that's the overall nut.
Let me give you the high level of that. The school committee, and Stephanie, feel free to jump in if you would like on this question. They did meet just like, I think they concluded their meeting at 6 p.m. So this is with 1 hour. That's why we didn't put it in the deck yet. The one-time expenses for literacy are about 900,000. There's a small amount for Morocco feasibility because we have to cover the interest expense. That's called about 125,000 in FY27. And then the next one-time expenses would be in FY29 and FY30, which would be about 250,000 and 400,000 respectively. So that would be for the math piece. And then in addition to that, there would be about that extra $1,000 per pupil that is phased in over a 4-year period of time. And that would be recurring spending. So the largest share of it, about half, occurs in the first year in FY27, and then the other half occurs split over the next 3 years after that.
Stephanie wants to be unmuted.
Okay.
Lovely. Stephanie, there we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so hot off the press, everyone. I just got out of budget sub, and Michelle, yes, we based on your feedback from the budget summit, we did take a critical look at all of those strategic additions, and we pulled out what we can consider one-time costs, not reoccurring in the operating budgets. For example, we will not be purchasing a new literacy curriculum every year, so it made sense to pull that out, and any associated materials and professional development associated with it. So we have that isolated in addition to math and FY29 and FY30. So that brings our total ask through FY30 to 3.8. I can get you that slide with all the details in addition to the FTEs associated with those costs. I'd be happy to share that with you. It was
And
just
the difference between, that's
Sounds good.
and the difference in the 3.8 and the 4.5 is the fringe benefits. So the 3.8 does not load health insurance and pension and OPEB for their employees. So that's that additional piece.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is on the school side and on the municipal side where we would look to grow above the 3% municipal and the 4.25% on the school side. Okay. The next piece is on, if you want to scroll to page 16, from a capital perspective. So we have worked with our capital planning committee to develop a pretty robust process, and that they've been running for a number of years. They have identified needs over the next 5-year plan, FY27 to FY31, of 85.6 million. Our available resources in the building and capital stabilization funds would cover 31.7 million of that, leaving total unfunded need of 53.9. These are actual requests, so this is not a depreciation schedule taking the useful life of our assets, or the total value of our assets, and dividing it by the useful life. This is actual documented needs that we have in our CPC process. This also worth noting, people always ask this question, does this take into account the fact that we have debt service that's dropping off? We have, as some of you who've been around longer will remember, we had bonded against the Building Stabilization Fund to fund both the construction of Ambrose and significant expansion to McCall. That debt is rolling off, some on the CSF, mostly on the Building Stabilization Fund over the next 5 years. That is taken into account in that 31.7 million. If we did not factor that in, we would have even less resource available than the 31.7. So the top priorities have been pretty consistent the last 3 to 5 years. Town hall, repairs to our schools, critical projects at Ambrose, Lincoln, and McCall, which need both roof, HVAC, and at Lincoln some flat roof projects, and then some other items that we'll talk about. But that's the size of the need, the 53.9. Can things come off of it? We do believe there's a couple of things that can come off of it. Ridge and Lachlan, which is an intersection out west near the farm, is potentially one that we can find a alternative to. Things like Parkhurst, which has been swing space we may not need the number that we have in the plan. The flip side is our DPW director has said that we need to find additional funding for our paving program. Sidewalks are a big concern in town that we've heard a lot about, particularly from seniors. And then as Roger McPeak would say, if you were here, things break. And so having a little bit of additional flexibility is potentially valuable as well. So what the capital planning committee, if you go to the next page, did with us is they said, okay, we have this $53.8 million gap in where the capital improvement program is relative to the resources that we have available. And so, one view, and this is package H, is that we can just, fund that. We actually find a way to fund that entire shortfall. They gave us a variety of options though, and you can see them here. There's 8 options, starting with, at the very least, doing the base scope of town hall, which would be the HVAC system, and so it remains in good shape from a sort of basic livability perspective. We have mold in the building. We have a number of challenges here as it relates to ventilation. So that's sort of the most obvious thing that we need to do. The scope above that would be doing a restoration of this building. So that would mean, since we're opening it up and doing a large project for the HVAC system and the building envelope, do we do the windows, the ADA accessibility, the bathrooms, and the carpets while we're doing that? That would be the first restoration of town hall since the late 1980s. Beyond that, we could add in the school projects. So we could add in critical repair work at Ambrose, Lincoln, and McCall. As I said, roof and HVAC projects at Ambrose and McCall. Lincoln has a chiller system as well as a bunch of work that needs to occur to the concrete pads and the flat work that's out front. You can combine both of those in option D, so on and so forth. Public safety building needs some modest repairs. Library phase 2, we need to do some windows there that need repair. Major parks, which are 3 Parks Mullen, on the west side of town, since we've recently done McDonald and Leonard, Skillings, and again in the middle of town, ADA with equipment and fire trucks, and then the full CIP. So they've given us a very large menu of different ways that we can attack this. And what you see on the first column there is what is the total amount of those projects. So just to pick a random example, for row D, for package D, that would be about $35 million of projects to do a restoration of town hall, get this building, which is in increasingly dire straits, back up to the state of repair that it should be in, and do the same for our school buildings for the 3 buildings that need critical repairs. 35 million is how much this project costs. And our estimate is putting an override of 2.4 million into our building and capital stabilization funds would allow us to do that number of projects. You'd say, how do you get that? Simply multiplying by 15. So we can bond out every dollar of recurring revenue at about $15 of proceeds. So that's how we went from what are the estimated costs to the number that we override in our stabilization funds. The capital planning committee has said, when we asked them, what is your recommendation to us? They said option H. We would expect them to say that. They also came back to us after a lot of debate and said, our view is anything shy of option D, they would view as as not, allowing us to even keep pace with the critical restoration that we need. Again, nothing in here is de novo construction. Nothing in here is building new assets. It's simply maintenance and repair to our existing asset base. All right. So that is capital. So we go on to page 19. So we've talked a lot about how we built the override perspective. We started with where we were, 12.5 to 15 is where the majority of the select board indicated we were. That was based on a perspective on level services, combining some of the strategic additions on the municipal and school side. We then took a view of how much incremental revenue or cost savings can we do. That's the 1.2 million. That gets us to a 3 to 4 year override. And then a view that we have to work hard to get it from 3 and change up to 4. That's the whole logic of what we've talked about today. So then the key question is, what is the impact on taxpayers? So what I'll do is I'll walk through this over the next couple of pages, and then I'll leave the rest of it for people to see because it's more detailed tables. So our average tax rate today per $1,000 is $11.08. The average home value in Winchester is about 1.45 million, which gives us an average annual tax bill of about 16,500. We have made the assumption for the purposes of the tax impact here of phasing in 70% of the override in year 1 and 30% in year 2. It's probably a little on the aggressive side. Last year it took less time. It took 3 years to fully phase in, FY 2020, 21, and 22. But we have shown it a little bit more front loaded here, just to give so people don't have a view that we showed them a lower number and then it came in, the tax impact came in higher. These are just some assumptions that you'll see on the next couple of pages. The average single family home in Winchester is worth about 1.65 million. So it's about 200,000 more than the average home, which is at 1.45 million. And the reason for that is the duplexes, triplexes, there's not that many of them, but the condos especially have lower valuations. Okay. So the next page 20, and apologies for the group in the room, it's a little bit small. We want to show people how we built up to it, and then we'll just show people from this point onward what the answer is.
What's the phase mean?
Phase in means how much of the override hit. So if there's a 10 million, so there's a $12.5 million override, 70% of it would be drawn in year 1, and then the full 12.5 would be drawn in year 2. So an override, recall, is not spending or taxing. The way an override works is it creates levy capacity. The town manager and the superintendent via FinCom bring a budget to town meeting. Town meeting decides what it wants to spend, and then our staff, with the select board's approval, draw whatever levy is necessary to cover the spending. So whatever, if we pass an override of 12.5 million, any number that we're talking about, we would not draw all of that on day 1. At the end of fiscal year 1, FY 27, we would have some that is undrawn. It is levy that is untaxed, meaning it is not hitting taxpayers. And that's the way it always worked. Last time they passed it in 2019, they drew some of it in the first year, more of it in the second year, all of it by year 3, but they did not draw all of it on day 1.
What's the benefit of doing it a 70-30 versus doing it the opposite way that was done in the past? In terms of drawing the money, you just said that you draw, with the last override, what was the percentage split out over the 3 years of the
It
override?
was really based on the budgets that were passed.
Budget passed it.
So this assumes to draw down something in excess of 60%, and it assumes a lot of FY 27 ads. It's really driven on how the budget's built between the town manager, finance committee, and town meeting. So if you're trying to get literacy purchased and literacy teachers and ramp up by 6 teachers, you're gonna hit that in the first year. If you're gonna hit, so it's really about implementation as well as growth.
So let's be clear, the amount that is uncalled, the excess levy is untaxed, right? It doesn't actually, the town is not receiving that money. It just remains as authority that town meeting could use. And town meeting doesn't actually pull it. But to Michelle's point, town meeting spends the money based on the spring town meeting debate. And then the select board via the assessor and the board of assessors actually uses whatever levy we need to balance the budget. That's the way the process works.
But
So let me walk through tax impact and then we have time for questions, unless you have something very specific.
well, I just say that the way it was done, the last time was the first time it was done that way. It hadn't been done that way previous.
I think showing 70% hit in year one is a conservative number. I'm not sure 70% of it would actually hit in year one, but what we didn't want to do is show people, oh, only 50% of it will hit in year one, and then they'll say that we showed a tax impact that is below what they experienced. So I think this is a deliberately conservative number, and we'll show you another conservative thing we did. We're trying to be very transparent with people about, this is what it could be. We're not trying to hide the ball and say only 30% of it will hit. And then town meeting spends more money and then ends up being a bigger number. Okay. So what you see on this page, and I'll just walk people through the way this works. Our current tax rate is 11.08. Average annual tax today is 16,243. You see that column come all the way down. CPA is a 1.5% surcharge of $244. Our current tax bill today, on average in town, is the 16,486, same as the previous slide. Okay. So next year, FY27. We have the initial base levy is 16,598. That's the 16,243 plus Prop 2.5. Okay. The override, if this was 12.5 million, if 70% of it hits in year one, is the 1,077. And then you can see the other 30% is in the next year at the 462. And so when you come all the way down the page in bright yellow, what you see is that additional 1,077 and the 462. Why are those numbers slightly higher? 1,077 versus 1094. That additional $17 is because the CPA 1.5% applies to the override as well. So whatever the tax goes up by, the CPA surcharge applies to that too. Same thing in the next year. Then you'll ask, well, why, if the whole override is put in 2 years, why in year 3 and 4 are you still showing $40 impact? Because the levy is slightly higher now, Prop 2.5 is compounding off of a higher number. So that's why we still see some impact in years 3 and year 4. So that's the yellow bar. That is the impact of the override itself. We also wanted to show everybody, what about all of the other things in town? We can't just look at the override in isolation. And so that's what you see under debt service. So Lynch School, everybody knows what that is. Most of that is in the levy today, but there's a piece of it that has not yet hit the levy. And that's the $115 going to 131. And then we think it'll level off there. So that's the last bit of the Lynch construction that is not yet, that's currently on bond anticipation notes, that is not yet in the levy. Same thing with Morocco Culvert. Lynch School and Morocco Culvert, obviously voters voted on them, but those are projects that are largely in the levy. There's a bit left to go in. South Reservoir Dam, Chapter 110 project was authorized by town meeting. Similarly, it's smaller, $50. And then the last one is the Morocco School. That is a project that does not exist yet. That is a project that we have been admitted into the MSBA process for. EFPBC's best guess is we would vote on that in the fourth quarter of 2028. So that is 2.5 years away from now for a vote. So what we did was we took a look at Lynch and we said, based on a January of 2023 vote, how much hit the levy in FY24 and 25? And that was a $71 million exclusion for Lynch. Morocco may be smaller. On the other hand, we'll have some inflation. So we said that's probably our best guess of what to assume. So again, that is something that would be a separate vote, but we wanted to include it there because we wanted people to see that impact as well, which is the $212 and then the $311 in years 3 and 4 of our plan, based on our best guess for timing of Morocco and just using Lynch as our best proxy. Again, smaller school, but with 4 more years of inflation. Okay. So you see the override impact in yellow, and below that, you see the total impact from everything else in town. Lynch School, Morocco School, South Reservoir Dam, Lynch School, Morocco Culvert, South Reservoir Dam, and Morocco School plus CPA. So we're showing all of the other voter approved initiatives and what they would add up to cumulatively. We want to make sure we show the impact of this in the context of the impact of everything. Okay. Next page, I promise I will not walk through because it's the exact same thing at 15 million. It's available if people want to see it and go through it, they should. Okay. Next couple of pages, this was all the previous page was all done at median home, which is 1.45 million. The average resident does not live in the median home. Well, the average resident does live in the median home. But most residents are not exactly living there. People live in homes of different values. So what we showed here was 5 different valuations, really just increments of 400,000 from 800,000 up to 2.4 million. The override impact in yellow, that's from the previous slides. The total tax bill impact, the total impact from all the other pieces that voters have approved, or in the case of the town meeting approved, and then the average tax bill over time, and that's inclusive of Prop 2.5 growth. So that's everything, all exclusions, the override, and Prop 2.5. Same thing for 15 million on the next page. There's no point in reading these, so people can do that and just try to find it, their interest, their property. Okay, last 2 things, and we'll switch into some tax impact points. So one question we've gotten on page 24, Carol, is how do we compare to peers? So Winchester today has a mill rate of, as I said, $11.08, so about 1.1% of a home value. With the 2 override rate, with the range that we've talked about, that would grow to about 11.8 and to 12, depending on when it's where we implement. And that's in FY28 with the full levy, the full number implemented in the levy. So assuming our historical growth rate of 5% of home values, and then the overrides going in, we'd end up somewhere between Belmont and Lexington. By the way, this set of peers was picked 8 months ago. It's the peers we used to research, so it was not cherry picked. Obviously, we don't know what other towns are going to do. Lexington just excluded a high school. Arlington is contemplating a $15 million override right now. It's the number their select board has said they're likely to put on the ballot, so they would go up. Other towns that don't have school buildings or overrides coming, and if they have property value growth, they may come down. We can't tell you what every town here is going to do, but just to give you a sense of where Winchester is today compared to. Last question we received, again from a select board member, last time's override was when they went out to town meeting with a range in February of 2019 of 8 on operating to 10, and then capital of 2 to 2. Capital was 2 either way, which is a 10 to 12 range. That's the blue. If you adjust that for CPI, you get the upper little panel there. You can see what that comes to. It's roughly 13 to 15. If you adjust it for MCI, which is the municipal cost index from American city and county, you get sort of a slightly higher, but similar number. Okay. Last time, of course, they chose option A. So they went out with a range of A to B, and they ended up with A. And that was chaired by the gentleman to my immediate left. Okay. So page 26, we've talked about the model, we've talked about the strategic additions, we've talked about how we thought about it, capital, tax impact. So then the question becomes, what about folks for whom this is a real burden, and what can we do to defray the impact of these tax bills on seniors and veterans and individuals with lower valued homes, which is our best proxy for individuals with lower incomes. So the select board's been working on this issue for really the last 6 months. We expanded the senior circuit breaker this fall by about 17%. As all of you know, or most of you know, we took an article or a couple of articles to town meeting to expand our senior tax deferral program to raise the limit from 60,000 to 72 to 109, which are the state caps. That's the program that allows people to pay either none or a portion of their tax bill rather than all of it. And then they can roll that forward until there's a state event or they sell the home and it's settled out of the home equity. So that's a great option for folks who have lesser income but more significant home equity. We are looking with the school committee and the Council on Aging to increase the number of seniors who are able to take advantage of our volunteer program, particularly with our school buildings. We've had as many as 50 plus people in that program before the pandemic. We're down to a much lower number today. The delta is really the school opportunities, so we want to bring that back. And then we also brought a article in the fall that was voice voted through with our veterans agent to double the exemption amount for our veterans, disabled veterans in particular. The other piece that we've looked at, taking a look at, those are a bunch of programs that are authorized in state law for seniors and veterans. We also are taking a look at the creation of what's called residential tax exemption. And the select board has discussed this more conceptually. We had interest in it from really everyone, and we talked about this at a 5 to 10% range, and I'll describe what this is in a moment. So a residential exemption is it's a feature in the state tax levy that was first, that's been there really all along. It was there in the original classification law in 1979. And what it does is it allows us to undertake a modest shift to both non-owner occupied homes. So that would be to, the 900 or so apartments that we have in town, but also from homes that have values below the median to homes that have values above the median. This does not affect the overall levy. So the amount of tax the town collects is identical. It does not affect the commercial or industrial rates. Those rates remain identical. That's a separate conversation if anyone wanted to change those. It does not affect those at all. And so the state allows the residential tax exemption of up to 35%. You tend to see that in communities that have a significant amount of rental, Boston, Cambridge, Brookline, Cape and Islands. A few other communities have, and notably Concord, have started to think about this in the context of an exclusion or an override. So Concord had a $200 million exclusion for a school, middle school, and that created a tax burden on folks who had more modestly valued homes, who tend to have more fixed incomes, tend to be more seniors. And what putting in place in their case a 10% exemption allowed them to do is to defray the impact on homes. It benefits everybody below their average, and their average is the same as ours, 1.45, but it really gives more benefit to homes below $1 million or below 800,000. So it's one of the most powerful tools we have in the tax levy to try to reduce the impact of an override on folks who live in homes, say below 800,000 or below $1 million. And the select board has to debate what that number is that we're really looking to protect, and then to pick a number accordingly. And again, Concord's at 10%. Most towns in the state are at some number north of 30. We have looked at this at a very modest level, sort of 5 to 10%, because what we're not trying to do is to create a big shift. What we're just trying to do is to take a subset of our homes and say, we want to blunt a little bit of the impact of the override on you, because we don't want to have folks who have those more modestly valued homes have a big shock. And so combining the senior tax deferral, which is for folks who have more modest incomes and more significant equity, with the residential tax exemption, which helps folks who have more modestly valued homes, it allows us to really do as much as we can, given our tools, to blunt the impact of this on vulnerable populations. Okay, back to you.
All right, so last slide, I promise. So going forward, right? So if we need to shore up our revenue, we need to sort of stabilize our financial position. We're committed, as we said, to maintaining that AAA bond rating, which our reserves, our operating reserves, that 10 to 14% is a piece. They look at lots of factors, but having achieved AAA, it allows us to save when we built Lynch, or if we build a new Morocco. Borrowing at AAA sort of bond levels saves us $5 to $7 million over the cost of a building. So if we were to lose that rating, it takes years to get it back, but allows us to issue short-term debt, long-term debt, and borrowing at much more favorable rates than the other. We have 351 cities and towns, only 14 have AAA. We want to make sure to maintain that. It does benefit us in every type of borrowing that we do. We also are, so we talked about the operating reserve policy that will ratchet up pending the override. We're also looking at long-term debt. We have traditionally borrowed doing level principal, so everyone pays the same amount over the 15, 20, and 25-year note. But if we can actually look at level principal for some of our new borrowing that needs to be of a certain size, we could save millions of dollars or shorten the life of a debt by 3 or 4 years, which could then free up cash to go into the next project or lower the payments. So we have a soft presumption. Question just came up from the treasurer in the last week. Hey, Michelle, we have this last bit of this. Should it be level principal or level debt? Well, we told the voters we're going to pay it this way. Let's stick with level debt. But we're going to look at where it makes sense. But there is an opportunity if we're paying our long-term debt on a principal basis versus a debt basis, we can actually shorten the horizon over which we pay that debt. So we want to try to test that out on several of our next upcoming borrowings. And then strengthen our OPEB trust management, which I said at the very beginning. Partnering with our treasurer and commissioners of trust funds to potentially get an outside investment manager. We are about to pay off our pension, so that's not insignificant. For every retired municipal employee, not every retired teacher, we are 99.4% funded. We'll need to make an annual allocation to keep that funded, but we're gonna, and we set a goal to fund it by 2030, we're gonna fund it by 2028. The state required that we get there by 2040. Then we're gonna pivot to health insurance, which is all teachers and municipal retirees. Back when I was on FinCom, the first investment was $50,000. We're at 9 million and growing. But we have like a massive liability, which I think will outlive me and maybe all of us in the room. But we're gonna try to pivot and start to make investments in that as well. So if we can get better returns on investment as that $9 million grows and is invested, and as we start to put money into it, we will really be, that will help our bond rating, right? We have a funding source for this long-term debt, we have a funding source for that long-term liability. And we're trying to keep our reserves at a healthy level. So that's what we're committed to do. And we'd be committed to doing that, override or not, today or tomorrow, but really trying to look at what we can do to just leverage what we can, shorten our borrowing horizon, and get more return on our investment. So that's our last slide. And it's a lot, I know. We're gonna start with questions in the room, and then if people, Carol, do we have questions in the chat?
I think there's
Yeah.
a bunch.
Okay.
So I'll look in the room.
Start with you first, and then we'll go to the chat.
Yes, start in the room first while I catch up on the chat.
Go ahead, Shubham.
Yeah, first, thank you all so much for all the work. It's amazing. It's beyond, anyway, thanks very much. And thank you for TMMA for arranging this, excellent communication. It's eye-opening, absolutely. My question is, sad to say, all the years I've lived in Winchester, I seem to have such little idea of what what an override is or a debt exclusion is and so forth, right? So let me ask, back when the residents voted for the money for Lynch School,
Yes.
was some 97 million, that's question one.
Yes.
Question two was a 400,000 override.
Yes.
Was that a one lump sum 400K or 400,000 every year?
Correct.
Into
So
the
is
capital stabilization fund, yes.
It's a ongoing 400,000.
So of that 400,000, about 280 was immediately bonded against.
Okay.
For the traffic calming work on Pond, Middlesex, and Kenneth Streets. So the way that you're talking about the January of 2023 ballot questions, those
Yeah.
are two,
Yeah.
right? So there was an exclusion, that was question one, that passed overwhelmingly,
Right.
it passed 80%
Yeah.
of the vote. That's about a $71 million exclusion, you mentioned the 95 number, that's the total budget. The balance is what the state gives us, MSBA gives us. So our share of that's about 71 call. That will be on our books for 25 years, and then it will drop off. So that's the way debt exclusion works.
Okay,
Yes.
We take the amount of bonds we need, we sell those bonds, whatever number we need, and it's about $5 million.
Right.
We put that on the levy, so it's equivalent to about a $5 million
Okay.
override.
right,
It goes on the levy for the duration of the bonds, and that school building is 25 years, and then it falls off. So in roughly 2050, the Lynch exclusion will come off.
okay,
So that's how an exclusion works. So the one that'll come off the soonest is
that's for the school.
for the
Yes.
building
Right.
itself. The second question was this capital stabilization fund override.
Yeah.
That was done because what the select board at the time did is they wanted to pair the two because they wanted to do traffic calming work at the same time as the school opened.
Yes,
And there's a big, I mean, you can talk to my background about this, that when they did VO, the traffic calming work on Ridge and Johnson was not done at the same time, and it took years after VO opened to
Yeah.
do. That was the logic, and I was not on the select board at the time, you were new to the select.
Lynch, I was not.
You were not on, yeah, you.
I was running.
2 months later, yes.
Yes.
So that was my, Rich Mucci, Anthea Brady, John Fallon, that was the select board,
Yes.
I'm missing one person. Mariana, so that was, that's what the select board was.
I'm
The
sorry.
400,000
help me understand.
when, yeah,
I'll back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
Question two for 400,000
Yeah.
was a total of 400,000.
correct,
Is that right?
correct.
Not 400,000 year after year?
No, it's 400,000 year after
Okay,
year.
total amount.
So
Yeah.
400,000 year after year, of which slightly less than 300 was used as a funding source to
Yeah.
issue about 6 million of, or call it 5 million of bonds, we can get the exact number. That was used to do all the traffic calming work. The other 100,000 did go into the stabilization funds, and it's been used to do some smaller projects,
Okay.
fleet and other projects.
Great.
But then subsequent years, the 400 has been coming.
It's now in your levy, so it was a permanent increase directed towards stabilization, capital stabilization, and you're paying it every year. And like this override would be, you'd pay it every year. It doesn't come off. The excluded debt has a time limit. An override is a permanent increase to the levy, so a
Okay.
permanent increase.
All of the 400, that, yes, so it's in there year after year, all of it was bonded against, I just pulled this up from Roger. The bulk of it was bonded against 285,000 for the Lynch traffic calming. The other 115,000 was bonded against for the McCall and library roof patchwork.
Okay,
That's where it went. So you're right that those bonds will eventually pay off. They'll probably pay off in 10 years. And then that money would become free again in sort of a 10-year period.
So those, technically, the 400, it was an operating override dedicated to capital.
Correct.
They were. It was an override into the CN. Exactly.
Do you
Exactly right.
understand?
I'm getting there.
It was an override that went into our capital funds. And then what we did is we turned around and we bonded against it.
So-
Just like they did when they built Ambrose 20 years ago.
So there are two types of overrides, an exclusion override, which is funds a single project for the duration of the capital expenditure. An operating override, which can be dedicated to capital, but is a recurring amount that goes up 2.5% every year.
So this 12.5 to 15 million quantity. That's not an ongoing, is it an
It is.
ongoing?
Yes, it is.
Ongoing. Just like the 2019 override. So that would be, some share of that would go into the operating budget to pay for school and municipal services. And then some percentage of that would go into the building and or capital stabilization funds to pay for
Okay.
capital.
So if you
It does
take
not drop off.
$12.5 million and divide it by what, about 8,000 households?
8,400, sure.
Yeah, but that order of magnitude, you come up with like $1,500, 1,500 every year?
That would, yeah, so Carol, if you go back to
So
the page,
how did it go to 1,000 and then 550? You know, the impact in year one was $1,000.
okay, yeah, I see, okay, so why don't you go to page, that's looking at that year's override, right? So look at the total tax bill. You're asking for the cumulative increase, we could show that too. So, yeah, why don't you stop here, so well, go up one side.
One more.
Yes. So look at the 1.6, which is slightly above our average.
Right.
So you could show the override impact as what's hitting that year. You can also show it as the cumulative. And what you're saying is you want to see it cumulative. You can see it more clearly in the row below, right? So in that row, you see so what you're saying is just take a look at the 1194. You're right to say it's 1194 plus the 541, plus the 43, plus the 44. So by the end of the period, it is a $1.6 million home would have increased by about $1,700. You're right.
Or current year bill, 17,994. By 2030, that tax bill is 22,226.
Yeah, so if you wanted to put the percentage increase year over year, that would tell the story.
Yeah, and it's about 5. It depends what size the override is, but it's about.
Well, it starts out at like 10.
It's
Correct.
higher the first year and then it comes. You're right. The first year's highest.
It goes on every year and then it compounds every year by the.
Correct.
You can pull it. Carol.
Done.
It's healthy.
Questions in the back?
There were a number of school-related questions and Stephanie answered some of them in the chat. But I'm gonna ask her to unmute and if she doesn't mind summarizing them, that might be great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so there were a couple of questions, and this came up in the last TMMA session about special education and the cost, the year-over-year growth and those costs. So that's the hope with investing in what we're calling tier 2. this is kind of a new thing that we're hearing about here in Winchester, but in a lot of our peer communities like Concord, it's just as common in the vernacular as an IEP. Everyone in Winchester knows what an IEP is. If you're identified with a learning disability, you receive special education services. And those services are in an IEP where you get one-on-one services in some cases. So with tiered supports and identified tier 2 students, we put them in a more appropriate level of intervention like small group instruction, which is a more scalable option for them, and it's also more targeted. So you give them that appropriate level of service, but in a way to give them an option outside of the IEP, which they don't currently have. In the last budget cycle, we added those 2.5 math interventionists. That's part of those services. So it's basically in-school tutoring for, you get a group of 3 students that have been identified, you do some targeted exercises to help bring them up to the standard. And the hope is that they won't need the additional support to go on to those IEPs. So that's one of the questions that was in the chat and also came up in the last session. So any other questions around that, I'd be happy to answer them. Anything else, Carol, in the chat?
I think
that I
there were
missed?
some other questions about the course
Course
offerings.
on, keep going. Did Stephanie answer?
Was it above?
No, it's below.
Oh, yes. So that is in
What are the
response to
expanded-
the,
Question was, what are the expanded course offerings and is that a one-time cost?
they're not one-time costs. They will be in the operating budget, and they're courses that we hope to continue to offer. And it's in response to the spring 2023 survey that was conducted, and that was the #1 finding: more advanced and course offerings were asked by both teachers and students and parents across the board. And this is in response to that. So more APs, more honors. Yeah, that's for what we call our, and then also it applies in middle. They're called exploratories in middle.
Gerard. Gerard asked a number of questions, some of which may have already been answered. Gerard, if you want to unmute.
Yeah,
Am I?
it's okay. It's Jerry.
Jerry. Sorry. If you want to unmute and ask them yourself, go for it. Otherwise, I'm happy to read.
No,
Think you're unmuted.
that's fine. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
there you.
Yeah, okay. So let me just go back here and see what those questions were. The one that Paras, at one point you mentioned average home value and median home value. And I was getting them confused. And so can you just clarify what the average home value is as well as what the median home value is?
The 1.457, so we'll call it 1.45 million is the mean. It's the average. I actually don't have the median, but it's very close. So we don't have a lot of outlier properties in Winchester. They're very close to each other. George, I don't know if you have a note offhand. Yeah, they're super. Yeah, I can probably find it.
So Jerry,
No.
one piece, the median single family home value is about 1.6, but the 1.45 is condos, 2 families, and some single families.
Got it.
And I think that slide was up there. The breakdown is in our deck. How many houses are single family? How many are 2 or 3?
That's
How many
really,
are
that's really
condos?
pretty close,
Yeah.
considering.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah.
that's about right.
So, different topic, the municipal strategic additions. I know an earlier version of the slide deck had a couple of pages where specific line items were given with dollar amounts. I'd be curious to know if there's someplace we could go to see in this. So for the, I guess it's 800,000. If we could actually line those up against the slide, which which gave the categories, but didn't give the specifics of what would be funded and at what amount.
Yes. So and again, so the the select board has taken the view that we will also, work with the town manager to phase those in, and that not all of it will be necessarily, done, because, for example, if we have no need on, a Department of Health grant, for example, we have probabilities against some of them. So with those two caveats, I have it here in front of me. It's on the box. I'm going to text it to Carol, who can drop it in the chat, and it is publicly available. It's also in the model, but the model will be harder to read. So I texted Carol the link. She'll put it in the box. If you look at pages 25 and 26 of the deck, that is the municipal strategic additions line by line. So those are down to numbers as low as $5,000. So it's broken down in a pretty granular.
Just texted me.
Did you get it?
And those are the pages from the prior deck, Paras, correct?
They were never, the strategic additions were never in the TMMA briefing deck. They were in the January 26th select board deck.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good. Thank you.
I'll email this to you directly, Jerry, but then Carol can put it in the chat for everyone else.
Yeah. I have another question, if I may, which I didn't put into the chat. So let me just hypothesize for a second and then get your reaction, Michelle and/or Paras. So we're talking at this point, it looks like I think you said the majority of the select board indicated an override in the 12.5 to $15 million. Key question is the operating versus the capital split. And if you look at the slide from the Capital Planning Committee, it would not be unreasonable, and perhaps I'm way out over my skis here, but it would not be unreasonable to think that the override would come in for capital at 2.4 million, which then means for the operating budget, if again we're going in the 12.5 to 15 million overall, that we are looking at a range of say 10.1 to 12.6 for the operating override. Any sense of what you can tell us, what more you get at 12.6 versus 10.1? Are we getting too much down into the weeds right now?
A very good question. Even taking the capital piece of it aside, I think let's just take the question conceptually. So if you are at 2.5 of capital versus 3 versus 3.5, it's pretty obvious. You can go further down that list of 8 packages, right? You can do more projects. The question I think is the correct one, which is if you're at 10 of operating versus 10.5 or 11, 11.5, 12, what additional value does the town get out of that? And I think the answer comes down to sort of two things. The strategic additions from the schools and the municipal side are all spending is subject to town meeting appropriation, right? The select board and the school committee do not decide that. And so it increases the likelihood and the probability that all of those strategic additions can be done. So if you look at that slide, it's slide 11, if people would slide it up, it was in the email TMMA sent out before. At 10 million, you can get to 3 years, and it's hard to get to 4 years of override, right? So if we have a view that a future select board is going to take a view that this needs to get to 4 years, by being in that 13 million, you get to the 4-year override number pretty quickly. If you're at 9.5% operating reserve, you need to be at 10. It doesn't take much more. Rather, this is page 11. It doesn't take much more to get to 10%, which means the strategic additions are safer, right? It's safer to say that town meeting would more likely be able to do all of them. At a smaller number, so closer to 10 or any number less, the strategic additions become more subject to the availability of funds. And it also requires more, pressure or more, the ability to find incremental revenue or incremental cost savings from the select board and the school committee. So that would be how the best way I would describe it. So there are things, for example, the select board could do from a revenue perspective that's not in the 1.2 million. That would be over and above that. That might be looking at employee benefits. That might be looking at transfer, station revenue. And if there is more, funding in the levy, you wouldn't necessarily do as much there. You can be less aggressive there, and also would make it more likely that you could fund the strategic additions fully from a town meeting standpoint, because you would have the flexibility to do so.
Thank you. That's helpful. And just good to hear your reasoning and your thought process. Can I ask you, you brought up incremental revenue. An earlier version had an additional $400,000, I believe, in turnbacks on the municipal side, above and beyond what we've averaged in recent years. Is that 400,000 in this particular model here?
Yes.
Or it
So
is?
yeah, it is. It's a great call out. So the 1.2 million of incremental revenue, it's really incremental revenue or cost savings. So historically we've had about 1.7 million, about 1% of our budget gets turned back. We have increased that to 1.25%. So it's about 2.1 million in this year. So it's about 400,000, to Jerry's point, above our historical assumption. So that's 400 of that 1.2, and the other 800 is what Michelle talked about: interest income, fines and fees, solar power, additional growth, all of that. So that's where the 1.2 comes from. To go above that, and we've talked about other scenarios that go above that, you then have to do, more things that can really move the needle in a material way.
Good, thanks. By the way, you guys have you've done a great job. I mean, really fine analysis.
Let's go back to the room and then we'll go to Carol. George, then Roger.
I probably phrased the question incorrectly, but I see the CPA, it's 1.5%. It affects our tax rates. Are those funds factored into like the capital projects? Can any of that come off of the capital?
They are not factored into the capital project, but for some of those projects, they could be. So CPA only allows you to do affordable housing, open space recreation, and historic buildings. So in theory, the capital planning committee doesn't use the affordable housing business. So let's assume that some portion of CPA would never go to capital projects because they don't do housing. But historic buildings like this one, open space, recreation, so fields, playgrounds could. That's CPA controls that money. That there's a committee of 9 members, and they will be taking applications probably starting next month. But it's a fair question, George. It's not baked into the model because we can't. Select board doesn't wish to dictate what they should do. But the community certainly has some input on that and which priorities we would have as a community.
And town meeting.
And town meeting, yes.
Town meeting is the
Town meeting
appropriation
will-
body ultimately, right? So one select board member did point out when we looked at those 8 packages that some of the projects on that list, Mullins, Skillings, and Ginn, could be great CPA projects, so maybe this could be removed. That's a good deliberation for the select board to have. Town meeting members did indicate in the survey that the select board, the WCCP, and the CPC did together. You may have filled it out. I hope you did. About the 55 members town meeting did fill it out. They had suggested a number about half could be used for capital. CPA has debated that they're not going to commit to a number, but they have told us that they are interested in projects that they can take down in full, like a park, as opposed to, say, putting $1 million towards a $9 million HVAC system. But certainly it's a very good question. That is money that's available there. We've all made the point that there are people who voted for CPA, some of you probably, because of the view that it could help with capital needs too, not exclusively, but as proportion of it. Sure.
A follow-up question on that CPA, because I didn't understand. When you're talking about a portion of capital, I thought CPA was 100% capital expenditure.
It is.
In the lowercase c capital
Correct.
expenditure. Yes.
It's not ongoing recurring revenue. That's right.
Right,
It's not.
so
It's,
we're not gonna be
CPA.
funding, happy-go-lucky programs with a CPA.
Correct.
Okay.
But so lowercase c capital projects, absolutely. But some of those projects, to Michelle's point, might be things like 160 Forest Street that are not coming off the capital queue. When we talk about
Right,
capital
that
capital,
capital didn't identify, but the CPA.
Or they just couldn't pay for it.
Right.
yes,
Right.
capital C capital, that 85 million that Roger and Jerry and you know, Stephanie and Brian work on, that's what we mean by capital C capital. You're right, it's all for project money though.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the question I wanted to ask was about the school population and what the projections are for the school population in this time frame, and how does that enter into the
That might be a good
calculations
question for Monday. I mean, the current school population is 4,391 students. What that's factored into, I think that's a good school committee question, and maybe that's a good Monday night question. But we aren't, but I don't think in our deliberation, it's like, well, it's gonna go up, it's gonna go down, let's cut those asks out. Our understanding from schools is that that's their number, they want $3.8 million. And they have needs for them.
So they have. Stephanie signed off, but they
She
do.
just came back.
She just came back, okay. Stephanie, do you mind answering your enrollment projection question? You can take it offline if you want, but you have it, it's page 40 of your deck from December 5th. So the question from Roger was, what is your enrollment projections?
Oh, she might have to be unmuted.
Hi, sorry about that. So the enrollment projections through the horizon of the current, sorry, I just logged back in. The question is about enrollment projections through FY30.
Is that right, Roger? Yes, Stephanie, that's right.
So the Donahue Institute ran an enrollment study for us, and basically at the end of the 30-year horizon, we're about flat, though there will be a dip in elementary this coming year, but in terms of high school and middle, it'll remain flat through FY30, and there will be a slight dip in elementary leading up to FY30.
Some of the, thank you, Stephanie. We talked about their level services is at 4.25. So the way that works is 5%, 4%, 4%, 4%. And some of that is the union contract coming online that has more restrictions on continuing education and, you know, more COLAs that are a little bit more affordable for us. Another piece of that, though, if they just open the doors as is without any right sizing, the first year, and they've talked about this at their table, that the first year that we've modeled at 5 and they've committed to 5 would actually be at 7 or slightly more than 7.
Correct. Yes, and we were just talking about that at budget sub, and it's about $1.2 million in cuts that we've had to make to hit that 5%.
And that is largely, Stephanie, section rationalization due
It's
to
a series of operational efficiencies that includes positions in central office. It includes balancing classroom sizes, balancing shared building resources, or sharing resources where we didn't have them shared before. Yes, so it's a series of things that we had to do to hit that 5%.
is what emphasizes that. So a big part of how they brought their trend growth down is the WIA contract that, as Michelle pointed out, last week, Unit A ratified, Unit C is already ratified, which are the two big parts of WIA. The other big piece, though, is the school committee. We wrote them a letter, 4 of us, saying we really want you to try to live in a more reasonable level of level services growth. It is the willingness to make some of those hard decisions around bringing that 7 to 5 via some of those cuts.
Correct.
And again, school committee has talked about that.
And yeah, and just to make room for these additional investments that we're looking for, these program expansions.
We're in the room, or we can go back to the chat. Just want to make sure we have. Okay, let's go back to the chat. Carol, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what's answered, what's not.
I'm going to read, unless Heather wants to, if you're still there and you would like to unmute and ask your question yourself, feel free. Otherwise, I will read it. It says, Heather, once you
She's coming up.
oh, here she comes. Good.
I'm
Thank
unmuted.
you. Yay, great.
So my question just really was, I know that the school committee today voted, but when you update your model to include the one-time expenses in free cash from the school, for the school committee uses versus the recurring needs, do you know exactly how, I mean, I get it's a model and it's an estimation, what is needed to fund the $4 million deficit and then the school needs with the town needs that you put in your presentation for 3 years?
So just one quick clarifying, Heather, it's budget subcommittee that met today. And we'll be bringing basically these figures to the committee tomorrow night.
Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify, but sorry.
Okay, so with that, whatever that they choose to do through free cash or through operating, can we get a clear number of what it would take to do that, plus the town's needs that are in your presentation for 3 years, for 4 years? Can you do that in a chart, kind of like the capital did? If we do this much, it funds this. If because Or are you not talking, you're talking about whether you're really debating more as a select board, whether it's 3 years or 4 years and you're going to fund it in the override?
Yeah, so we can show, yes, we can show a simplified model. I think what you're describing is actually the model. That is exactly what the model
A
does.
simplified version, yeah, so they don't have to go
It
into your
takes-
model and, yeah,
Yes, so what you're asking for is a one-page model output that is 3% muni level services growth, 4.25 schools level services growth, health insurance, OPEB, all the assumptions Michelle went through. Then the strategic additions laid on top, and then what happens at various levels of override and what you
Yeah.
could fund, what you can, that we just showed what the assumptions are and what the answer is. If you'd like to see the simplified output of the model, happy to do it.
Yeah.
that
It would
would be
also-
really beneficial to have that slide. And then from that, if the select board chooses not to fund whatever in say 3 years and they're gonna cut it, last time they did the model, they came up with a number, and the last minute things were shifted and it wasn't defined what was actually being cut. If the select board chooses to cut that number, can you please
So
talk at your table about what you're cutting or what you're
Well, Heather,
removing from an addition?
I'm not sure that's the way to look at it. The select board chooses to go 10 million instead of 12 million. It's what the budgets that will be brought to town meeting and town meeting will ratify will do. The town manager will build their budget, schools will build theirs, FinCom will take it and give it to town meeting. Town meeting can adjust that number, but what the select board will do is not cut that program lives or dies. It will be, this is the number we're asking taxpayers to pay. How that gets spread over 3 years or 4, how that gets spent will be up to town meeting and FinCom. I don't know the select board will say, I'm gonna go kill off that initiative. We're gonna say, this is the number we're gonna ask voters to support. I understand the question, but I'm not sure that's the math. It will be, what do we think is the overall appetite and what do we think we can deliver? Things can change, right? Priorities can change on the town sides, priorities can change on the school side. Not that tier 2 wouldn't happen, but like tier 2 could need to expand more, it could shrink, electives could ramp up, could ramp down. I don't know that it's gonna be a clear, straight line of sight to this number kills off these 10 things. Those things could come in, those things could not be needed 3 years out.
I think that what you're describing is the nature of the select board debate, candidly. And the 5 of us will have different views on that. I think, Michelle just gave you one. Appreciate that is a way we could look at it and we can create that output to put in front of, our 3 colleagues. And people could answer the question that way. They could also answer the question, Michelle, the way Michelle said. So that to me is a little bit of like what materials are in front of the select board next Thursday kind of discussion. We're always happy to get people's feedback on. We probably should talk to our 3 colleagues as well as to what they want to see. We've been creating, if you've watched our meetings, 20-page decks to walk everyone through very carefully to try to make a decision. And you can see all those in the box. One way we could look at it is what you said, Heather, and I think a valid response to that is what Michelle said, which is you don't have to look at it that way. So I think different select board members are going to answer what number they think people are going to support or most comfortable with different ways. One way is to look at tax impact. One way is to look at what we can fund and what we cannot fund. One way is to look at how long we think this override should last. And so what Michelle and I are trying to do is the chair and vice chair of the state town, and as the chair of the select board, is to give our colleagues enough information and to give ourselves enough information to make the best decision.
Agreed.
I think Heather has a follow-up.
Well, I understand that position that you took, Michelle. The hard part about it is then it leaves it all in the hands of town meeting to figure out.
It's always in the hands of town meeting to figure out the budget. That's town meeting's job.
Certainly, if we were to say we will do an override of X, it is appropriate for the school committee or the capital planning committee, I think in particular, to give us their opinion on what they think that does. And we have our own opinion on what it does
Of
for the
course.
municipal side.
And that's what I think Monday night is for, right? Is for everyone to hear that. We're gonna hear, it's not just the select board you're gonna hear from, you're gonna hear from schools, you're gonna hear from capital planning.
Yeah.
But where that budget, where the rubber hits the road is always town meeting.
Right.
Who could say, that's nice, select board, we're ignoring your growth targets, we're ignoring what school committee committed to, we're gonna give more or less.
More. Based on.
Well, it's not the select board's budget, right? It's the town manager's budget, which we give some input on. It's finance committee that presents it to town meeting and town meeting votes it.
I think it'd be a good conversation for town meeting to have as part of your vote.
So Heather, look, we had a budget summit with the school committee and the capital planning committee and the town manager. When was that?
Last Wednesday, only a week
I
ago,
think I've seen it every day.
pretty much.
Live. So at this table, and we did have one member of the school committee say, at a certain level of override, he thought certain investments were no longer going to be able to be done. Shared that view. Not saying nobody really fact checked that or put it in the model, but that is valid debate to have, right? That at what level of override do when looking at our output, do people think it's likely that certain things will be funded? Let's just take an extreme example. At a $2 million override, I think it's probably fair we're not getting a tier 2 program. Okay. So the question then becomes, in that margin of error of 10 million, 11 million, 12 million, what do we think is likely to be funded? What do we think is likely to last 3 to 4 years? How do we triangulate that against the impact on taxpayers? And that is the very iterative, discursive conversation that the select board has been having for a month and a half, and we will keep having for the next 10 days. No easy answers.
I just wanted to offer that I think it would be really helpful to have annual percentage increase on almost any number that we're talking about. So, you're talking about the town 3%, school 4.5%. Then the total expenditure and what percentage that's going on, which I haven't heard, but so people don't have to try to do the math in their heads of how it all computes. And when the taxes are going up, what are the taxes going up next year and the following year and the following year? In other words, in a standard way of looking at every number, annual rates of increase are extremely useful.
It's a good ask. We will add that to both of those numbers. I like that Roger's asking us to add more numbers to our deck.
Percentage.
The annual rate of increase, I think, is that slide that we have, and you could just
I
give
think-
it to
I
percentages.
think you have the dollar increase in that slide.
Yeah,
You can get to the percentages. Well, it takes 2 seconds to add a memo row showing the
Right.
year-over-year percent increase.
Right.
Happy to do.
When you guys, when you come up with a number and it clears town meeting, I did notice, like other.
Okay, sorry, George, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
So, all town meeting members, please do read the packet that we sent. So just to be clear, the override number does not go to town meeting. So the way the state law functions is it goes from us to the voters, but then all appropriation has to go to town meeting.
But it goes to town meeting to pass to go to the voters,
No,
right?
No.
it's
No?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
it's a quirky nature, it's a quirky function of state law. Operating overrides go directly to the ballot from the select board.
Yeah.
Exclusions go from the select board to town meeting to the ballot.
Thank you.
And because this is an operating override, it goes directly to the voters. It's not because we were trying to cut town meeting out of the equation, it's state law.
I understand, yeah, thank you.
But it used to be that town meeting would vote an appropriation with pending the override vote. It was a very conservative way of setting up the override. So that we voted consistently before the town meeting voted before the override vote occurred in the past.
Not in 2019, so
No, not in the most recent one was different, that's what I said.
Wasn't that just for debt
It was
exclusion?
mostly debt exclusion around here.
Like
because otherwise you'd be doing this in
bonding
summer.
subject to passage of a debt exclusion?
But that's where I was confused, because
Not-
I had remembered voting on that.
I think we did both,
Voting
but,
off.
but somebody approved.
We can check the history, but
Yeah.
Our charter and part of the state law prevents town meeting from voting on financial matters until the
First Monday in May.
first Monday in May. So there's no way we could legally vote on an operating override because it's a financial issue
Because you did it.
before the first date there. So you can vote on, when you get to the town meeting, you can vote on debt exclusion overrides, but not on the operating, the quirky.
So debt exclusions have generally gone select board,
Yeah.
town meeting voters. So Lynch, for example, fall town meeting, 2022, January 23, vote of the general public.
Yeah.
Operating overrides tend to be the other way around. We are calling a special town meeting for Monday, I hope all of you come. That, taking our precedent from 2019, only has one article, which is Article 1, except reports from committees, town officials and officers. So this is just information, because there is no vote to be taken, apart from let us sit at the front and adjourn.
So when the select board lands on a number, I noticed that other neighboring communities for their town, tax impacts, they have it right on their
Yeah.
websites. Are you guys planning on doing it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
So
where exactly it's gonna land, we've gotta figure out, but yes.
the easy math, it's in the memo that we sent to town meeting is 0.084 times the number, so say 12.5 or 15, times your home value in thousands. So if you have a $2 million home, 2,000. So you can do 12.5 or 15 or any number in between, times 0.084, times your home value.
Where's
But-
108.4 come from? I was
From Dan Earl. That's the factor
Okay,
per million.
got it.
No.
So there were couple of questions from the chat, and if any of you wanna unmute, just put it in the chat and I'll unmute you. Stephen Boksansky asks, did you give any consideration to where the town can trim spending?
We, I think, gave a lot of consideration to that, and so, so maybe we're saying it a little on the subtle side. On the municipal side, there's candidly not an enormous amount of spend that we think that we have overstaffing in different departments. And the reason for that is we do have a healthy level of turnbacks, right? So DPW, we added 0 new positions, and the reason is when we talked to our DPW director with their town manager, he said, I have 6 vacancies and I'm not gonna fill those. And so we've generally done our quote cuts via just leaving positions open. Part of the reason that this override lasted 7 years, not 3 to 4, is because we consistently have about 1% plus of turnbacks, all of which, sorry to your friends on the school side, come from the municipal side of the government, right? Schools turn back like 70 grand, and the municipal
Oh, no,
side.
not even that much. Oh, no, like $14,000 on 7.
Under 100. So on the municipal side,
That's shameful.
so on the municipal side, we have, meaningful turnbacks, 500,000 for monthly positions. We generally have been conservative on forecasting revenue. And so we will continue to do that. And that is reflected not by going through our budget and crossing out FTEs. So that is one way to cut a budget. Another way is to actually just take the percent of turnbacks from 1 to 1.25. That is a blunt way of just sizing a larger number. And Jerry asked the question, that's an additional $400,000 of implied non-spend, largely on the municipal side.
Just one thing. Last year, there was 300,000 in Chapter 70 money that was sent back to free cash. I guess that's not a turn back, but
That came from the state, Stephanie.
that came from the
wasn't a
state.
turnabout.
That's true.
Okay,
That's true, but it went
so
straight
with
to free
regard to
cash.
our school friends, rather than looking at history, looking forward, that is the bringing trend growth from 5.5, 5 and change to 4.25. The first year bringing your Stephanie, you should say this, from 7.3 to 5 is taking actual cuts to their budget, actual reductions in FTEs. Would you want to add anything to that?
Okay, sorry, I was muted again. Yes, so that's how we hit that 5%. There were FTEs that were cut, that there are classrooms that were shifted around, there were resources that were now shared between buildings to hit that 5%. Because we were at, I think, what was reported 6.9 with retirements for level services before that.
Is that helpful, Steve? It's a little different based on either side of the government. Michelle, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Steve, on part of our process is looking at, we didn't go into Parsons' point, we did ask DPW, what do you need? And they said, I think they now have 2 vacancies, they had 6, we just hired 4 guys. But what we did look at, and we're not gonna realize that maybe in the first 6 months of FY 27, Steve, is where can we regionalize some services? Where is there procurement we can do? If schools and municipal purchase things together, will we get better rates? Could we regionalize some services and programs? Those conversations are happening. They have begun, but I'm not sure that we're going to be able to say we're going to share this person across 2 units or share this person across 2 towns. We are parts of some collaboratives. We're looking to see where we can do more of that, but I don't have an answer for you. Like we're going to be 1 less of this type or 2 less of those people, but it's an ongoing focus of ours. Try to find some of those efficiencies.
Yeah, no, I asked the question because I think it's helpful to maybe include some of that discussion into the presentation. I think it does show that you've done the work. It's obvious that you have done the work. But I think this is an easy question that people are going to come to when we're talking about spending more money. Naturally, you look at the presentation, there's not one mention of like, oh, we thought about, cutting here or cutting there. So it's really just more, I think, advisory. But I do appreciate the answer as well as all the hard work that you put into this.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. We will. There's a single bullet on it for WPS. The fact that the turn back number is kind of an implied way of doing it on the municipal side is, I think you're right, too subtle. We will be clearer about that. It's good feedback.
Kathy Bodie Kathy,
You trying to call time on this?
No,
did you want to unmute? Kathy Bodie, are you there?
I am. I just wanted to, first of all, let me just say to Paras and Michelle, you did an amazing job consolidating all of the information from the work of the committee. There's been a lot of discussion tonight about the number that could be picked, and that's entirely select board decision. I think that once that decision is made, it's going to be really important for the community to get on board for this override, to know what the impact would be if it's not passed. And I think, to follow up on Steve's comment, that you've done, select board and school department done a lot to contain costs by not filling the DPW position, as you mentioned. But that's a loss as well. There's work that's not done, or people have to work harder to get the work completed. And I think that's going to be important how that's presented. But I also think the impact on the work of the town, the impact on what the children are going to experience is really going to be important. And I don't think it's embedded in things you've said, but it's not as explicit as I think it needs to be.
Yeah, so
School committee.
yeah, we're actually on Monday night, we're gonna have superintendent, school committee and the manager talk about what that means if there is no override. That is part of our presentation. It's not a part of our presentation tonight, Kathy, but it will be part on Monday. If no, what that means. We'll ask the manager to speak to municipal impacts. We'll have schools speak to schools impacts. That is planned for Monday.
The select board did meet yesterday.
Because we're meeting every day.
Meeting every day. To decide on what kind of free cash use would we recommend a town meeting. in the event an override did not pass, we will have a structural deficit that we've set as sort of 5.5 million. We worked with FinCom, we talked amongst ourselves, and the number we picked was 3 to 4 million. So we would expect to see, some real cuts. It's unrealistic to say it would be zero. Yeah, we're not going to use any free cash. We would use, a level consistent, maybe slightly less than last year. And school committee, I believe, has received that number from us. I know they have because we sent it to them, and they were using it in their deliberation tonight at their budget subcommittee.
But basically, we have to pass an override. The only question is what size. And the consequences of not passing an override at this point are layoffs. I mean, if anybody doesn't understand that, that needs to be clear.
So I think that, our superintendent or a school committee member and our town manager will communicate the implications of it. We're trying to be objective. We're not trying to say we're gonna get rid of our fire department. I mean, we're being thoughtful, and we back up every claim that's made. And I think that will be presented on Monday night clearly to folks.
Yeah.
There will be no doubt an education campaign that is not a municipal function. That's a political function that does do that work. But let's be clear, the voters are the deciders. And none of us can decide how 6,000 people are gonna ultimately vote.
I actually take issue with the structural deficit thing, because we can raise our receipts at will. At the will of the people.
Yes.
And, all it takes is 51% or whatever, and we raise our taxes. So the structure is that the voters have to agree with the override amount. And we've been doing it consistently. If you look at our growth rate in spending has been considerably above the limits of 2.5 plus new growth forever. We have been growing faster, and we just periodically have to have an override.
Since the financial crisis, it's been above 2.5 plus growth. I agree with that. I don't agree with that from 1980 to 2000, and it was pretty close to that between 2000 and 2000.
In 1980, the school population
Yeah.
was still dropping substantially every year, all the way until 1990.
I guess to go back to Steve's earlier question about, are we looking at ways to cut growth? We looked at that in 2019, and what we found was the town had been cutting expenses from proposition passed in 1880, been cutting it. They did it by chopping the DPW by half, by not hiring anybody else, and by largely not investing in any infrastructure, buildings, roads, everything.
Yeah.
And we're paying for that. And the thing that got us then was after 1990, the early 2000s, the population began to increase again. The only thing, and we got more children in schools, and all the schools had to hire teachers and expand. And they said, oh, by the way, we didn't invest in the schools in the 90s. They're all falling apart. So then you were caught in rebuilding the schools. So it's been
Right, and people, the condition of the schools are unimaginable by today's standard. I mean, trash cans with water dripping down all over a school and stink.
Yep.
Yeah.
I will say, and Michelle and I have spent a lot of time talking about the history of decisions that have been made. Some of those conversations with Carol, some of those conversations with Lance. There's $10.5 million of exclusions running through our levy today. Some of that is flood mitigation. It's overwhelmingly school buildings. And those school buildings have been done over about 25 years. The facts report in 2000 described the condition of our school buildings as deplorable. That's a direct quote from the fact report. And the fact is that the state was reimbursing much higher percentages in the 90s and into the early 2000s.
Thank you, Newton North.
Yes, thank you, Newton North in 2010. MSBA was created under Romney in 03.
Ambrose did well.
Ambrose did well.
66%.
But it came down, right? So we were paying that backlog. The other thing that's worth considering, Michelle talked about how once we finance our pension, we'll drop from spending about $5.5 million a year in our pension to the normalized cost, the normal cost, which is about 2 and change. That additional 3 is what's called the UAL, the unfunded actuarial liability. All of that is principally for people who have been working for us for decades already, meaning for decades, up until the last 20 years, we were underfunding our pension. So if you take out deferred maintenance on our assets and defer and not funding the benefits of employees that were in our employ at the time, that's $13 million right there, right? So a lot of what the last 25 years has been, this is, again, Michelle and I say things maybe a little bit more at the high level on that first slide, has been making up for a lot of those investments historically.
There's two buckets of questions in the chat I want to get to, and we're approaching 9 o'clock, so I want to be sensitive to people's time, but, I'm going to go in opposite order. This was a question, Catherine Hughes. Why not fund the balance of the operating deficit, 1.5 million, I believe, after new revenue sources are considered from free cash and defer the override to FY 28? That would enable the town to explore in depth some of the additional new revenue ideas the committee explored. And then Lauren Herman, I think, responding to that, said, isn't the hard FinCom position to not fund recurring expenses via free cash ever?
That sounds like a FinCom debate.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, I mean, that's a fair question from Catherine. If we could, would we push off the override, spend free cash? We would find ourselves back to the same voters and with an override agreed in a year's time. Select board voted a free cash number yesterday. Our goal was to not spend all the free cash that we have and to not even spend to close that deficit with free cash, because we don't know what will happen next year. So we could, I suppose, but I don't think there's any will with this. The will of the select board is to put an override question on the ballot. There's no dissent there.
You can also defer the strategic additions. So.
Yes, you defer additions, and I think you potentially have an even bigger hole to fill next year. So yes, it does push that tax bill off on voters for a year, but I think it also makes it a slightly more dire if no scenario. The if no override scenario this year will be, painful. It would be orders of magnitude more painful if we didn't do it.
I think we looked at that in 2019, and if you put it off a year, then you get a vote, then it's not implemented for another year. And what you run up against at that point is your union and your teachers' contracts all require that you give people a certain number of months before they're pink slipped. And you find out you wind up having to pink slip people before you can actually put any money in place to keep them employed. And that basically led us to question about, is it worth putting it off a year in order basically to scramble the entire employee and school teacher system.
So basically,
and basically leave everybody concerned that they may not have a job, so they split, and then we have to hire new staff.
So yeah, thank you. That's basically 3 reasons. Strategic addition. So the strategic additions don't get done. There's a sentence in it's a shorter sentence on page 4 of the deck. It's more clearly framed out in the report, which is we are not in a crisis today. This is what Michelle just said. We are not in a crisis today, and our objective is to get us proactively on good solid ground before we have one. And so that's the second piece. And then the point I'll make, which Roger would make or Jerry would make, I don't know if Jerry's still on, is that every year we delay capital inflation, construction inflation has tended to outpace ordinary inflation, certainly for the last 5 years. It's been, more like 5 or 6% per year. So those just get more expensive.
Catherine, did you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just for clarification, I asked the question, I don't personally believe that is what we should do, take the money out of free cash for obvious reasons. But the question always comes up at town meeting, and people have been asking that question already. Yes. With $20 million in the bank, why don't we just spend from that and kick the road? But I think the larger question is, and the committee has done a wonderful job of looking at potential other sources of revenue, but most of those had longer term implications. But I think one of the benefits of taking that approach, taking the money out of free cash, potentially would be to look at some other things, such as distributing or potentially selling off some underutilized assets in town or looking at, I know one of the projects that was looked at was a lot at the DPW. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I'm not recommending it. But I know there were a number of creative solutions the committee looked at that could not be implemented in the short term, but potentially could be over the long term. So it might be worth at least touching on that when this comes up at town meeting on both issues, because I'm sure the cash question is going to come up. It always does. But also at least informing the audience that some of those discussions took place, because I think they're very beneficial, and appreciate all of your work, and your presentation tonight was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for that reminder. And thanks for being part of State of the Town. Thank you.
Okay, I think there's one last question a little bit related to that. And Susan, let me know if you want to unmute. It's from Susan Nardone. Did our new town manager have any input into this process? Is he aware of any new revenue streams that could benefit Winchester? And she thanks you for all your hard work and transparency.
So yeah, Chris has been here for like 3 weeks, so he did not have a lot of this process, Susan. No, he will be preparing a FY27 budget. He is chasing down some additional revenue with department heads. I know that. And I think the select board will be getting some updated fee schedules probably in our March meeting. But what we did ask him to do was take those municipal asks, as Paras had mentioned. Steve Delaney, who's our acting manager until the end of the calendar year, met with department heads. We asked Chris to go back, pull off that list, see what he thinks might make it onto his budget, see what might require, maybe it's a year away. So he is going to have the influence really on how next year looks and maybe additions over FY27 and FY28. But he was not part of the conversation of, I want to have, I think he believes cybersecurity is a good idea. It will likely be in his budget, but he wasn't here for all of those conversations. But he is taking the lead on trying to find revenue and trying to understand where municipal needs are and when they need to come on.
Yeah, just two quick things that I know everyone wants to go home, but Chris has a lot of experience as a town manager broadly, but Cohasset was a CPA community. George's question, how do you cobble together different sources of funding from stabilization funds, free cash, state grants, CPA? He has a lot of experience doing that, and we look forward to that being very impactful. One specific idea he had, which actually I think is fairly interesting one, and one that we could actually really help us move the needle on some of the fines and fees numbers. To fee question is our building permit fees. We can revise those. The other thing that happens is people say we're going to do a $50,000 project, and then they do the project, it ends up being a $70,000 project. In Cohasset, what he did is he implemented an attestation at the end of how much money you actually spent, or you sign under oath, which both impacts our building permit fees and our new growth number. And he said that, lo and behold, people claimed X, it came in at 1.2X or 1.3X, and it actually did move the number up over a number of years in terms of both the levy and the amount they collect in fees. So it's a creative idea. He gave us something for the select board and Chris and the building commissioner to keep doing.
Can we put a stake in the heart of that oil tank at the dump idea?
That is not on Chris's radar to explore right now.
That is not back on the door.
It is not, also not back into our numbers.
But it was in this summary.
We spitballed lots of ideas.
But there's a paragraph at the beginning of that section that says we explicitly encourage people to be bold and creative. All these ideas are not going to make it, and that is one of like 16 bullets. That's
okay.
Yes,
but not my bad.
Okay, with that, on that note, I think we've reached the end of this session. Thank you very much for watching, and appreciate all of the town meeting members and others who are listening at home. A reminder, there's a special town meeting convenes at 7 p.m.
Correct.
At the McCall, repeat McCall, not the Winchester High School Auditorium. If you have not read your email, I believe Mary Ellen sent out a notice from the town clerk's office repeating all the information. But she also provided some very good advice on where to park or where not to park, because there are nice large snowbanks all around to get in there. The town meeting will be open to observation, obviously. The only question will be Article 1, and that question is, should we take the report and put it in the town files? It's not a vote for or against the override, that comes later, the town thing. But there will be a public hearing that I think Michelle is in the select board hosting, that's starting at 8-ish or something like that.
When the
and-
town meeting wraps up or town meeting wishes to adjourn.
And at which point, Michelle and Paris and all the other, officers will be up and available to be asked and answer any questions, so.
Correct.
Thank you all again, good night, it'd be nice and cool on Monday nights, so bring your warm
Oh,
jacket.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Carol. Thank you, Lance.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Carol.
everyone.
Thank yous in the chat. Great questions, everybody.